Usually when a console fails, it's for a number of reasons that are pretty common. You know, the hardware's bad, software's bad, there's no third-party support, there's no killer app. The Dreamcast, on the other hand, had all of those things on the good side, and it failed for a different reason entirely.
The Dreamcast is kind of an anomaly in that it's the only failed console that actually wasn't that bad and is very well remembered. You know, no one really looks upon the Atari 7800 fondly, no one really misses Virtual Boy, but the Dreamcast had a lot of fans.
The birth of the Dreamcast was supposed to be a new start for SEGA. Alright, prior to the Dreamcast, they had management who just couldn't make a decision and stick to that decision. And we saw this in their previous generations of consoles.
There was the Sega CD, there was the 32X, there was the Sega Saturn. These were all pretty decent ideas, but Sega put them out on the marketplace and then abandoned them almost immediately, burning not only the fans who bought them, but also the game developers who were developing games for them.
If you're a fan of Sega, and all of a sudden they're releasing systems back to back within like 2 years of each other, it's gonna piss you off. You know, it's like I just dropped all this money on, you know, a new system, and then within a year you're talking about releasing something else? So that means I gotta drop all this money again to buy it?
Electronic Arts is one of the biggest names in gaming because they make the best and the most popular sports games. And they were so mad that Sega had pulled support for the Saturn, they said, we're never going to work with Sega again. We're not going to develop for their consoles.
And that was actually a really big blow because EA was known for all their great sports games, including, of course, Madden.
Going into the launch of the Dreamcast, people were making fun of Sega. They were pissed. They'd been burnt a handful of times at this point.
And people were just thinking, you know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me a second and third time, still shame on you. Fool me a fourth time, shame on me.
The thing is, when the system actually launched, it really was good. And it won over a lot of media. It won over a lot of gamers.
So the Dreamcast actually broke a lot of new ground. It was the first 128-bit system, the first one with a modem, the first one with online play. It even had its own ISP called SegaNet. Even if nobody used it, but points for trying.
Dreamcast was also the first console that had a web browser. There's still no web browser for Xbox 360, you know, that's a very forward-thinking thing they did.
It was one of the first video game systems that actually used Microsoft Windows as its platform, making it easier for developers to make games for it.
They were gonna make the memory cards little mini consoles unto themselves, and it gave the function of a little screen only on the controller, and you could use it, say, in a football game to pick your play without the other person seeing.
And you could also pull the VMU out of the unit and play little mini games on there. I think they had a little Tamagotchi game on there. It's like a little, you know, virtual pet game.
And unlike pretty much any console launch before or since, they kicked it off with a great slate of launch games, including Soul Calibur, one of the greatest games of all time.
Soul Calibur is just a well-rounded, top-notch package. You know, it's got the graphics, the sound, it's fun to play, it's accessible but also deep. It's just a great game.
Look at Midway's Ready to Rumble. It's really fun. It was a great party game. I mean, it did everything right.
So even though EA wasn't making sports games for the Dreamcast, Sega said, you know what, we'll just make our own sports games. Thus was born the 2K Sports Series, which was just as good as anything EA was putting out.
Sega's NFL 2K series actually ended up rivaling Madden, both in sales and critical response.
It earned a reputation as one of, if not the greatest sports gaming console ever. They didn't earn that reputation with EA's help. They earned it by making their own badass sports games.
The Dreamcast got off to a great start, and the people buying it were video game fans, and they were buying a lot of games for it. So at first, it looked like it was a very promising new system.
You know, in 3 weeks, the Dreamcast sold more than 1 million units in America. It's pretty wild. The problem, the complicating factor here was the rumors and eventual announcement of the launch of the PlayStation 2.
You may not believe this today, but back then the name Sony was associated with a pleasant, fun gaming experience. With them even just announcing the theoretical existence of the PS2, well, that just took all the wind out of Sega's sails.
Even though PlayStation 2 was still a year and a half away, Sony had developed a pretty strong following. They released a lot of great games for PlayStation 1, and they were still releasing pretty good games for PlayStation 1, and Sega realizes between them and Nintendo, they don't really have much time left.
So despite all that, the Dreamcast still had a really fantastic first year. A lot of classic games came out of that era. Soul Reaver, Choo Choo Rocket, Sonic Adventure, and a huge library of sports games, of course.
I played a lot of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on Dreamcast. There were a lot of great cult classic games.
Shenmue or Shenmue, whatever you want to call it, was kind of bizarre. I mean, it was a game where you simulated some dude's life, and you'd basically just walk around. I mean, it was trying to be sort of like a life simulator.
There was a fishing game. Fishing games are surprisingly popular. I think they're popular with people that don't play many other video games. Some people like fishing games, and there was a fishing pole accessory.
You had like Jet Grind Radio, which is just this weird like cel-shaded rollerblading graffiti game. They came out with that game Seaman, in which you talk to a fish with the human head.
Seaman was like a virtual pet game, and so basically you would kind of talk to your Seaman every day, and eventually he would start talking to you.
Power Stone's a really fun 4-player game, also very casual. Oh, the Resident Evil on Dreamcast was really good, Code Veronica.
Dreamcast might be one of the few systems that had a blatantly racist game. Honestly, on what other system could you put out one of the greatest games of all time featuring a bunch of stereotypical Mexicans? Samba de Amigo. The Dreamcast is amazing.
So even though they had all these great games, you know, quality costs money, and the bean counters figured out that they had to get the Dreamcast into about 5 million homes for it to start making a profit.
When you sell an advanced piece of technology like a game console, it has to be big or fail. There's not really an in-between. It's a very expensive proposition, and the Dreamcast needed to be very successful very quickly.
So there's nothing sadder than a desperate game company, and after the PlayStation 2 came out, Sega got really, really desperate. First they started cutting the price. They made it $150 and said, look, it's half the price of a PlayStation 2. Forget it, didn't work.
They went as far as to say, hey, if you sign up for SegaNet, which is their online service, we'll give you a Dreamcast. They can't even give them away. That didn't work.
And then, I mean, this is the kicker. The PlayStation 2, when it came out for the holidays, they could not meet demand. They shipped about half of what they promised.
They're supposed to ship 1 million units. They only ship 500,000. So what does the Dreamcast people think? Wow, this is a great opportunity for us to capitalize on the PS2 shortage. We're gonna have a really good Christmas because there's 500,000 people who are not getting a PS2. Well, they gotta buy something. What happens? People are like, you know what? I'd rather have nothing for Christmas than a Dreamcast.
They couldn't even sell Dreamcast at Christmas. Even with no PlayStation 2, they couldn't even sell Dreamcast at Christmas. That's kind of sad.
People had to wait until March to get a PS2 rather than have something under the tree. And they were willing to wait until, March of the next year to get their system. And that just shows you the stark contrast between the brand loyalty that Sony has and the brand loyalty that Sega could never muster.
Sega is a company whose years of BS finally caught up with them at the worst moment. It caught up with them when they finally launched a system that was amazing.
At this point, Sega realizes their brand has no strength anymore in hardware, and they think, let's just get out of this. We can't do this.
And then in 2001, a mere 18 months after it launched, Sega pulled the plug on the Dreamcast, playing true to form and surprising absolutely no one.
They said they needed to sell 5 million consoles, and they only got to 3 million. They realized they were never going to get to 5, so they kind of pulled the plug. And a year and a half's pretty quick. There's been consoles a lot worse than the Dreamcast that lasted a lot longer.
The moral of the story here is if you don't protect the integrity of your brand, you can never get that back. So by not protecting that, nobody trusts them anymore.
Sega's like the Ike Turner of video games, It's like for years, man, with the launch of every new bit upgrade, the Sega Saturn, it was just like another smack in the face. And then they come back, with another system, be like, oh, I'm sorry, baby. I'm here for good this time. I'm here for good. Finally, by the time they cleaned up their act, they came back, they brought the Dreamcast, they're like, we're setting up permanent roots, we want to have kids, we're gonna be here for a while. Tina moved on.
And even after the Dreamcast, Sega just can't stop losing. They announced they were getting out of the hardware market altogether. They said, we're just going to make games now. We got these sports games. They're pretty good. So they went up against the EA NFL football games, and they said, we're going to put ours out at half price.
EA was obviously worried because they spent a gajillion dollars and bought the exclusive NFL license. So now they're the only people that can make football games with the New York Giants and with real football teams and real football players.
And that pretty much put Sega out of the sports game business too.
The Dreamcast was a great system, and even now, 7 years later, people are still making games for the Dreamcast.
Everyone I know who's ever owned a Dreamcast still has it. And that's a lot more than you can say for most video game systems.
For some reason, I won't throw it away, even though I haven't played it in years. It's just a sign of respect.
There are a ton of gamers out there with their Xbox 360s who feel like, all right, this is who I'm married to now. That Dreamcast who I used to date in high school, if things just went a little different, we'd still be together. It'd be awesome. We'd be, in Tahiti right now. But you're like, it's cool. I got Halo 3.
Maybe we were all too worried about Y2K to notice, but Dreamcast was a pretty good little console.
win!